Daniel had always believed that love was unconditional when it came to family. His mother, Margaret, and younger sister, Emma, were the center of his world. Since his father's passing, he had taken it upon himself to provide for them, ensuring they never lacked anything. They constantly reminded him how lucky they were to have him, how no woman could ever love him as deeply as they did. It was comforting at first, the unwavering devotion, the way they made him feel irreplaceable. But as time passed, that love began to feel more like a chain, tightening around him. At 28, Daniel had built a stable life. He had a well-paying job, a comfortable home, and a heart that longed for companionship beyond the walls of his family. That's when Rebecca entered his life. She was different, warm, kind, and full of life. For the first time in years he felt seen, not just as a provider or protector but as a man who deserved to be loved. He had met her at work, their conversations flowing effortlessly, laughter coming easily. She wasn't just another passing attraction. She was someone he could imagine a future with. Excited, he told Margaret and Emma about her, expecting them to be happy for him. Instead, their smiles faltered. A flicker of something, disapproval, unease, passed between them. Margaret was the first to speak. "Are you sure about this, Daniel? Women like her, they only come around when they want something." Emma nodded in agreement. "She barely knows you. How can you be sure she isn't just pretending?" Their words lingered in his mind longer than they should have. He knew Rebecca wasn't like that, but his mother and sister had never steered him wrong before. They had always been his biggest supporters. Surely they were only looking out for him. The doubt festered and soon he started pulling away. Rebecca noticed the change almost immediately. "Why are you listening to them?" she asked one evening, frustration evident in her voice. "I love you, Daniel. Why can't you trust your own heart?" He wanted to. God, he wanted to. But his mother's words echoed in his head. "Women outside the family will never love you like we do." It wasn't an outright demand, but it felt like one. Margaret and Emma became more involved in his life, subtly keeping him away from Rebecca. They would call him at odd hours, needing help with errands, demanding his attention. "Family comes first," Margaret would remind him whenever he hesitated. "You'll understand one day." Rebecca tried to fight for him, but it was a losing battle. Every time she reached out, his mother or sister found a way to cast doubt in his mind. They would mention fabricated stories of women who had used men before, tales of heartbreak and betrayal. And slowly, his love for Rebecca was buried under the weight of his family's influence. One evening, he sat across from Rebecca in a quiet cafe. She looked tired, drained from weeks of trying to hold onto something slipping through her fingers. "I can't keep doing this, Daniel," she whispered. "I love you, but I won't compete with the people who should want the best for you." His chest tightened, but he couldn't find the words to fight for her. His mother and sister had convinced him he was making the right choice. So he let her go. Margaret and Emma didn't hide their relief. "You'll see," Margaret said, patting his hand. "One day you'll thank us." Emma smiled. "We just want what's best for you, Daniel." He nodded, forcing a smile, but for the first time, doubt crept into his mind. If this was love, why did it feel so much like control? The weeks passed, but the sense of unease didn't fade. Daniel told himself he had done the right thing, that Rebecca would have only distracted him from his responsibilities. Margaret and Emma reassured him constantly, making sure he knew he had made the right choice. But deep down something felt wrong. His home, once a place of warmth, now felt suffocating. His mother and sister's affection no longer brought comfort. It felt like a carefully constructed cage. Margaret and Emma seemed more at ease now that Rebecca was gone. They laughed more, planned family outings, and ensured Daniel was always by their side. It was subtle at first, the way they kept him close. A small favor here, an urgent errand there. He barely had time to breathe before they needed something again. "You're the man of the house now," Margaret would remind him, her voice thick with expectation. Emma, too, leaned on him more than ever, as though he was the only thing keeping their world intact. One evening, as Daniel worked late in his home office, a message from Rebecca lit up his phone. He hesitated before opening it. "Daniel, I need to talk to you. Please. It's important." He stared at the words, a war raging inside him. He had promised himself that chapter was closed, but something about the urgency in her message unsettled him. Against his better judgment, he called her. She picked up on the first ring, her voice laced with desperation. "Daniel, I didn't want to say this before, but I can't stay quiet anymore. Your mother and sister. They're not who you think they are." His stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" Rebecca hesitated, as if weighing the risk of speaking the truth. "I've heard things, Daniel. I don't know how to say this, but I think they've been keeping things from you. About your finances. About your life." A sharp laugh escaped him, though it held no humor. "You don't know them, Rebecca. They've done everything for me. They would never." "I'm begging you," she interrupted, voice breaking. "Look deeper. Don't just believe what they tell you. You deserve to know the truth." He hung up, heart pounding. Rebecca was grasping at straws, trying to plant doubt, trying to claw her way back into his life. That's what his mother and sister would say, at least. But for the first time he wasn't sure. That night he couldn't sleep. His thoughts raced, torn between loyalty and suspicion. When the house fell silent, he found himself moving toward his mother's room. A quiet voice inside urged him to check, to see if Rebecca's words held any merit. He hesitated outside the door, hand hovering over the knob. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but what he heard instead shattered him. His mother's voice was low, urgent. "He's starting to ask questions. We need to be careful." Emma responded, her tone clipped. "Don't worry. He's too blinded by guilt to look too closely. We just have to keep him in check." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His heart pounded so loudly he feared they would hear it. Every fiber of his being begged him to walk away, to pretend he hadn't heard a thing. But the betrayal had already seeped in, poisoning everything he thought he knew. Moving quickly, he made his way to the small home office where he kept his financial records. His hands trembled as he sifted through statements, receipts, and bank records. What he found made his blood run cold. Large sums of money had been withdrawn from his accounts over the past year. Transactions he had no memory of approving. Jewelry, expensive spa treatments, luxury shopping sprees. All in his name, all signed off by his mother. His vision blurred as realization crashed over him. They hadn't been protecting him. They had been using him, manipulating him, keeping him tethered so they could drain him dry. The weight of it all knocked the breath from his lungs. Everything Rebecca had said was true. He had thrown away the one person who truly cared for him, blinded by the illusion of family loyalty. The people he had sacrificed everything for had never loved him the way he loved them. His hands clenched into fists as he tried to steady himself. He couldn't stay here. Not anymore. But what crushed him more than anything was the bitter truth. He had willingly let this happen. And now there was no going back. Daniel sat in his darkened office, the evidence spread out before him like a crime scene. His heart pounded with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was emotional. His mother and sister, the people he had devoted his life to, had been deceiving him for years. Every kind word, every affectionate gesture, had been a carefully orchestrated manipulation. The realization left a hollow ache in his chest. For the first time he questioned everything. Had they ever truly loved him, or had he simply been a means to an end? The memories replayed in his mind, the way they had clung to him after his father's death, the way they had subtly isolated him from the outside world, the way they had poisoned his relationship with Rebecca. It had never been about protecting him. It had always been about control. His hands shook as he gathered the documents, shoving them into a folder. He couldn't confront them yet. Not until he had a plan. He needed to secure his finances, cut off their access to his accounts, and create an exit strategy. The thought of leaving filled him with guilt, but that guilt had been his greatest weakness. It was the very thing they had used to keep him trapped. The next morning, he acted as though nothing had changed. He ate breakfast with them, listened as they discussed weekend plans, nodded along to their usual conversations. But beneath his calm exterior, his mind was already moving ahead. He visited the bank first, freezing their access to his funds. Then, he contacted a lawyer to begin the process of reclaiming what was his. Every step felt like cutting away a piece of his old life, but with each severed tie, he felt lighter. Margaret and Emma remained oblivious, still basking in the security of their deception. That evening, Daniel returned home earlier than usual. He found them in the living room, laughing, relaxed, completely unaware of what was coming. He stood before them, the folder in his hands, his heart hammering in his chest. "I know everything," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Their laughter died instantly. Margaret's face hardened, but Emma's eyes widened with panic. "What are you talking about?" Margaret asked, her voice carefully measured. Daniel threw the folder onto the table, the papers spilling out. "The bank statements, the forged signatures, the thousands of dollars you stole from me." Emma swallowed hard, her fingers twisting in her lap. Margaret, however, didn't flinch. Instead, she sighed, as if he were a child throwing a tantrum. "Daniel, we're family. You wouldn't have denied us anything if we had asked. Why are you making this into something ugly?" His stomach twisted at her nonchalant tone. "Because you never asked. You lied. You manipulated me into believing I needed to give up everything for you." Emma finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Daniel, please. We didn't mean to hurt you. We just—" "No," he cut in. "You meant to control me. And I let you." He turned his gaze to his mother. "But it ends today." Margaret's expression darkened. "You think you can just walk away? After everything we've done for you? For me?" A bitter laugh escaped him. "You did nothing for me. You did everything for yourselves." He exhaled, the weight of years of manipulation pressing down on him. "I'm done." Margaret stood, her eyes cold. "If you leave, don't bother coming back." Emma reached for his hand, her eyes pleading. "Daniel, please. We're your family." But the word family no longer held the same meaning. He pulled his hand away, stepping back. "No. You're just people who used me." Without another word, he turned and walked out. The night air was crisp against his skin as he stepped outside, the first breath of freedom filling his lungs. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it belonged to him. Daniel sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel as reality sank in. He had walked away, but the years of control and manipulation had left deep scars. The weight of what he had lost pressed against his chest: time, trust, love. He had given everything to his mother and sister, only to realize too late that their love had been conditional. The pain was sharp, but beneath it was something stronger: resolve. He would not let their betrayal define him. His first thought was Rebecca. He had pushed her away, blinded by the lies fed to him. He scrolled through his phone, hesitating before dialing her number. It rang twice before she answered, her voice cautious. "Daniel." Hearing her say his name nearly shattered him. "Rebecca. I owe you an apology." There was a pause. Then softer. "I wasn't sure I'd ever hear that from you." "I was a fool," he admitted, the words heavy but necessary. "You tried to warn me, and I didn't listen. I let them convince me you were the enemy when, all along, they were the ones who—" He exhaled sharply. "I should have trusted you." Another pause. Then a quiet sigh. "I never wanted to be right about them, Daniel. I just wanted you to see the truth. I do now." He clenched his jaw. "I don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed to tell you that." Rebecca was silent for a long time. "Where are you now?" "Nowhere," he admitted. "I left. I don't even know where I'm going." "Come over," she said, surprising him. "We can talk." For the first time that night, something like hope stirred in his chest. He drove in silence, his mind racing. When he arrived, Rebecca was waiting by the door. She looked at him carefully, as if searching for the man she once knew. He met her gaze, ashamed but determined. She led him inside, offering him a seat. "What now?" she asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "I feel like I've wasted my life living for them. I don't even know who I am without them." Rebecca's expression softened. "That's the first step, Daniel. You finally see it." He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't even know where to start." "You start by choosing yourself," she said simply. "For once, you put yourself first." Her words settled deep within him. He had spent his entire life serving others, sacrificing his happiness for their approval. And where had it left him? Alone, broken, and manipulated. But it wasn't too late. He could rebuild. Over the next few weeks, Daniel focused on reclaiming his life. He moved into a small apartment, away from the house that had been a prison. He restructured his finances, cutting off all ties to his mother and sister. Their messages came daily, pleading at first, then accusing, then demanding. But he didn't respond. He had given them enough of his life. Healing wasn't easy. There were nights he lay awake, wondering if he had made the right choice. But each morning, as he woke up in his own space, free from their control, he knew he had. The world was different now, uncertain but his. One evening, he and Rebecca sat on a park bench, watching the sunset. "Do you think they ever loved me?" he asked, his voice quiet. Rebecca sighed. "Maybe in their own way. But love isn't control. Love isn't manipulation. What they did to you, that wasn't love." He nodded, the truth settling into his bones. He had spent years mistaking obligation for love, guilt for loyalty. But now he understood. Love wasn't about sacrifice, it was about choice. And for the first time in his life, he was choosing himself.